Hello everyone, and welcome to the GTAC Tech Talk webinar on troubleshooting logs and support information for Security Center. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Derek. I'm a technical training e-content specialist with Genetec, and I'll be hosting the webinar. We also have some of the other members of the Genetec Technical Assistance Center standing by who are assisting with the webinar questions and answers. Since we're going to be looking at the video, access control, and LPR sides of the Security Center system, we have a member of the GTAC available for each team. Our first GTAC expert is Martina, who is one of our technical support engineers with the video team. We also have Wasim with us, who is one of our technical support engineers in the access control team. And if you have any LPR related questions, we have Patrick, who is a technical support specialist working with the AutoView team. And of course, helping with questions and keeping everything running smoothly as always is Scott. Scott's an e-content specialist with the Genetec Technical Assistance Center. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can just type them in the question box of the GoToWebinar console, and one of us will get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. In case we need to verify any of the information for your question or for the answer to it, we'll make a note of it and we'll get back to you via email as soon as we have an answer for you. Now, all the questions and answers from the webinar will be posted on the GTAC Tech Talk section of the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal forums about a day or two after the webinar has finished. If you have any additional questions or comments on the webinar or the GTAC Tech Talk webinar series in general, you can post them in this section of the GTAP forums as well. All the videos of the previous webinars can be found by going to the Tools section of the GTAP, then going to Videos, and choosing the appropriate category here, GTAC Tech Talk. Now there's two ways that you can watch these. You can either watch it streamed in a browser window by clicking on this icon here, or you can download a zipped Windows media file by clicking on the second icon right here. If you'd like to receive emails concerning the latest additions to the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal, you can log into the GTAP, go to the My Account section, and go under Email and Notifications. From the Notifications section down here, you can check the boxes of the subjects that you're interested in, and you can select how often you'd like to receive an email when there have been additions to these sections. To put a checkbox next to a subject, the frequency here will have to be set to daily or weekly, otherwise the options here are going to be grayed out. You can also edit your subscription to our two Genetec newsletters in the Email Subscriptions section from the same page. Don't forget, you're going to need to hit the Submit button on the bottom to save your changes. Now, before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish with this webinar. Now, in previous webinars, we've taken a look at some of the basic troubleshooting for some of the more common issues. Today's webinar is going to focus on some of the more advanced tools that you can use, or how to get the information our support team needs to properly investigate your issue. We're going to talk about Wireshark a little bit, but we're not going to go into details on how to run a Wireshark or other kind of network trace. I mean, honestly, we could spend our whole time talking about it, and there are already some good tutorials on the web available to learn how to run and analyze Wireshark traces. Now, since Security Center is a multi-component system, we're going to be taking a look at what can be done to troubleshoot issues in all three areas: Omnicast Video, Synergist Access Control, and the AutoView LPR system. Now, moving on to the agenda, let's take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to start with troubleshooting techniques and tools for video, and we're going to take a look at what we can use Wireshark for, what we can use the console for, and any other tools and procedures that might be helpful for video-related issues. We're going to take a look at access control next. Now, we don't have a lot to cover in terms of troubleshooting, but we are going to look at how you can gather more information for your support cases. We're going to take a look at console trace information. We're going to look at the logs from the HID and the SMC or Synergist Master Controller units. And we're going to see what we can get from Wireshark Traces as well. Now, even though we're not addressing what can be done directly, it is important to know what information we need and what it can be used for, and really how it helps resolve your access control issues here. Last, we're going to take a look at the LPR side of things, starting with the event viewer, and we're going to move on to what we can use a Wireshark Trace for, and then what we can use the console for. And the main part of the section here is going to be for configuration, so your most common configuration issues that can cause problems on your LPR system. Now, you may have noticed we've gone to a widescreen format, and we're going to take advantage of that by having a progress bar on the side of the slides here. Now, this way you can say which section we're talking about, and if you need to go back and review the video, you can fast forward until you see the section you want to review. So as we go through it, you're going to see a little indicator on the side here showing you which part that we're actually in here. Alright, as we mentioned, we're going to start with the Omnicast video component of Security Center, and the first subject we're going to cover is what we can see from a Wireshark Trace. Now, bear in mind that when we're looking at doing a Wireshark Trace for an issue, we should really have already exhausted the more basic steps, such as pinging the unit and making sure we can get to the unit's web page. Think of it like building a house, and the troubleshooting we're doing today is basically like parts of the roof. So you're not going to start by putting the roof up before you've built your foundation and your walls. So if you have an issue where a client is not getting video and everything else has been exhausted, we can use a Wireshark Trace to check the packets going between the various components. We'll want to check the packets going from the camera to the archiver, from the archiver to the redirectors, between the redirectors, and finally from the last redirector to the client running the security desk application. We're also going to need to check between the client and the media router and the redirectors as well, as there is some communication between them. Now, when we're looking at this kind of issue, the camera should appear as online in Security Center, so the icon and text should be white. If it's in red, the camera is offline, and we're looking at something a little bit different here. Now, when you're getting transmission loss problems when trying to view the recorded stream, take a look at the stream going between the camera and the archiver. If there are no packets going between them, the problem is usually on the camera side here. The camera might be overloaded and trying to send too many streams with too high a resolution or frame rate. The other possible culprit is that the network can't handle the load and the bandwidth being pushed by the camera exceeds the networking equipment at that side. Now, when we're getting a no data received from the network error, check if the particular network traffic type is getting through, such as UDP, TCP, or multicast. The camera commands may be getting through, but not the video traffic, since it's using a different transportation method. An easy way to see if there's a blockage between the archiver and the media router is to look for null values in the multicast address. So null value will look something like this. We can also use Wireshark to check if there's any duplicate multicast addresses that have been assigned. You would see the video going through using the same multicast address, but would be able to identify them as two different video streams. This is something we can also do from the console if you want to do that as well. Now, when faced with problems seeing video on the client or viewing recorded video, we should at least be able to see the TCP communication between the archiver and the camera. The actual commands vary based on the manufacturer and the model of the camera, but seeing communication between the two is important. If you're not seeing any communication, it might be the firmware or something that's not been set up properly on the camera. You can go to the GTAP and you can check the supported firmware for the camera that you're using. You can also take a look on the GTAP for the video unit configuration guide. Now, there may be a setting on the camera that needs to be configured from the camera's web page in order for Security Center to be able to talk to it properly. This is from the Documents section. You can look under Hardware Installation and Configuration Guides. And you'll see here we have the Security Center Video Unit Configuration Guide for the current version. If the video from the camera is working and the PTZ appears to be set up correctly in Security Center, take a look for PTZ commands going from Security Center to the camera if you're getting any kind of PTZ response issue. This way we can tell if the problem is with the command that's being sent, or if it's just not even getting to the PTZ unit at all. If you take a look in the Wireshark Trace, you can see that the PTZ commands are fairly obvious in most cases. So just looking at the data here, we can see PTZ command right here in a couple of places, so you can tell that this is actually a PTZ command that's being sent through. If you're seeing packet loss issues on your video stream, you can use Wireshark to get a more detailed analysis of each hop and see where the packets are being dropped. Now, once you know where the packets are being lost, you can check the network components involved between that particular stretch of network. So you need to check the components on each machine on each side if they're two different servers, and you check the network in between there as well. We're going to move on to see what we can find out from the Security Center console. The console can be run from the for the server, for the config tool, or for the security desk as well. So to get to the basic server console, open a web browser and type in HTTP, then the IP address of the server, or if you're on the server itself, you can use localhost as well. Then /genetec/console. Now, if you have a console password set up in the server admin, you're going to need to enter that first. And once the console is open, you need to go to the command section up top here. By default, it opens up in the traces. Now, if you're not getting video to a client, one of the things you can try from the console is running an RTSP trace and check the codes returned from each step. To run the RTSP trace, go to the command section as we mentioned, and under all commands, right here, enable the RTSP client traces on. Now you're going to see an RTSP client traces enabled acknowledgement here for each trace that's been set up. Now once the traces start coming in, you're going to have to go to the traces section here. And you can do a quick Google search to find the codes and see what they mean. So for example, 200 here is OK. Well, if you get 408, that means that you're getting a request timed out. Now you can also use the IP address of the to see which server is in use. So basically we can use that to see if the action is being performed by the media router or the redirector, since both of them may be on the same machine, and you can use the port to see which one is actually being used there. So this you can see here, we've got the IP address of the port. We also need to check the keep alive, that's what we're focusing on here. We need to make sure the camera is staying in touch with the archiver as well. If the camera is not responding, there may be something on the camera's hardware side that's causing the issue. Now as well, take a look at if you get any really slow responses on the keep alive, or it's not coming through. This can show up as transmission lost errors as well. So basically take a look at the network communication and see if you are getting that keep alive command coming through. If you get 3 failed keep alive checks, that's going to cause the camera to be marked as offline, so you'll see it go red in the tree. But the archiver will keep looking for it, so if the camera does come back, if it can be seen in one of the keep alive checks, it will come back online and go white. Now as well, once you're finished here, don't forget to go back to the command section, and we need to run the RTSP client traces off to turn off the tracing that's being done. Now if there's a problem viewing recorded video, take a look at the time sync before running the RTSP trace. If the time is okay, we may need to get the RTSP traces to our development team. We can also check the console if we see skips in the video or if the wrong video is being displayed. So from the trace, we should be able to see which file is being requested, including the server it's coming from and the path, which is important in a system with multiple archivers and the possibility of failover. As we mentioned, the console can be run from the server, or it can be run from the config tool or the security desk. Now, if we're running the console for one of our client applications, the client application must be running at the time, and when you open up your web browser to open the console, you should be running it as an administrator as well. We're going to move on to some other tools and procedures we can take a look at for some issues. If you're having any problems with the stability or performance of a unit, once again take a look at that video unit configuration guide that's available on the GTAP, and take a look at the recommended firmware as well. As we mentioned, some units may have unique settings and configurations that need to be set up on the web interface so that the camera can be more stable in the security center. The best practice would basically be to have this on hand when you're adding new units, so you can go in and configure any options that need to be done before the unit is discovered in Security Center. A lot of the stability issues that we see can really be traced back to some of these configuration steps that are available in the guide, so I really want to emphasize that it's something important to have on hand. Now, when you have a situation where the client workstation is seeing a spike in the CPU usage, there's a couple of things that we can look into. Now, the first step is to check the video drivers, the version of DirectX that's installed, and the .NET framework as well. Now, the versions of these components may be functional and supported within the software, but there might be a newer version that's more efficient and can help decrease the resources used by the client machine. Another tip is to use the automatic stream switching function to help reduce the load on the workstation itself. This would be applicable if the cameras support multiple streams, and you can have one set up for the low resolution and have another stream set up for the high resolution, as well as your live stream as well, and that way you can set up a less demanding configuration, video configuration for the low resolution, and a larger one for the high resolution, so it will adapt and not use up as much resources when you have a very small tile. Now, another useful tool is the Telnet application. Telnet can be used to check the connections from the media router to a client in the case where we're not getting any video. You don't really need to run any commands once you Telnet in, we just need to really see if we can log in. As soon as you log in, you're good to go, you can close the Telnet session. Now, we would need to Telnet to the media router from the client workstation using the server address like we have here, and the RTSP port used by the media router. If you can connect, then we need to run the same test for the redirector using the RTSP port that we have set for the redirector. Now, by doing this, we can see if it's the media router or the redirector that's causing the issue. We can also try to Telnet from the client to the media router and redirector if we're getting a no data received from the network error. Now, this will tell you if the commands can get through, but we would need to run a Wireshark Trace after that to see if any video packets are coming over. The video packets would typically be using a different network protocol, such as UDP, than the commands that are being sent to the camera. Now, for any problems in transmission of the live or recorded video, we need to make sure the network view is configured correctly. Now, the network view should be a good representation of the network locations and not the physical locations. Physical locations is more for your logical view, but this is really how you want your network set up. We need to make sure that the path here is optimized between the servers and the networks. It would also be a good idea to summarize some of the network connections when looking at the network view. We don't need to represent every single subnet that's out there, so basically if you can summarize several subnets into one network, that would be preferable. In cases where you see the no data received from the network issue, the wrong capability may be configured in the network view. For example, we may be trying to use multicast when only unicast UDP is available on the physical network. If you're not getting video on the client workstation, take a look to see if the live and playback video are using the same stream. Such in this case, we have our live and our recording, and they're both set to the same stream here. Now if this is the case, check the archiver to see if it is actually recording video. So we know the first step in the network was okay, and we don't need to check the connection from the camera to the archiver. In a case where they're not using the same stream, you would need to verify this connection for the live or recorded video, depending on which one is not getting through. Alright, so we're going to move on to looking at what we can do for any access control related issues. As I mentioned previously, there really isn't a lot that we can do from the logs themselves, but it's important to know what the support team needs in order to properly diagnose an issue. With some issues, we can take a look at a log or a trace and see that a certain message relates to a definite problem, but this is usually not the case with the access control issues. Now, one important thing to mention is that all three pieces of information are needed to diagnose an issue properly: the console traces, the HID or SMC logs, and the Wireshark traces. The console may tell us if it's not an issue with the security center system, but without the HID unit logs, our support team won't be able to tell if the problem is on the HID unit or perhaps a network issue. Now, if something is directly related to the access manager role, we may need to set up the dump files as well. But that's something our support team would notify you that they need and basically help you get that set up as well. Now, similar to the video troubleshooting, we need to make sure the basics have been done before we start looking at the console for most common problems, such as when we're looking at unit offline issues, for having problems adding units, or for getting any kind of synchronization issues. When opening a support case, it's important to give them the timestamp of the issue so they don't have to search through all the logs for the problem. If you aren't sure when a problem occurred, you can also take a look at the various reporting tasks in Security Center and identify when the issue happened. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at are the console logs. With these logs, the support team will be able to know if the problem is software related. The logs show that the data is going between the access manager and the units, which is basically one way most of the time, coming from the access manager and going to the units. There are no acknowledgements from the units, so the logs will be unable to tell if the unit received the command or what it did with the command, only that the command was sent from the access manager over the network. Now, the console can be set up manually, but the easiest way really to get the data collection going is by running the Trace Enabler application. You can get the Trace Enabler from the support team member who's handling your case, and we'll also be including in the GTAP utility soon. Another thing we're looking into is having this added as part of the software for future releases of Security Center. Now, the data from the traces is collected into text files, which is stored in the C Program Files x86 Genetec Security Center 5.2 logs folder. So let's take a look at what the Trace Enabler looks like and what we'll need to do to configure it to run. So the first section up here, we've just blown it up a little bit to make it easier to see. Is for the connection to the Security Center system. So we need to run the application on the server we'd like to get the console logs from. So the first thing we need to do is give it the Windows login credentials and the domain that's in use. If you want to use the account you're currently signed in with, you can check the Use Windows Credentials checkbox here. The next step is to tell it where the installation folder is located, and we're using the network path instead of a drive letter here. So if you need more information, you can take a look at the example down here, and it gives you a pretty straightforward sample right there. Once you've got that entered, you can just hit the connect button, and if all the information is correct, it's going to say connection successful, and it'll be ready to go for the next step. So the next thing we need to do is this section here. We've blown it up again. So basically we need to tell the trace enabler which console we wish to run. So from the drop down here, you can see we can pick the server, the security desk, or the config tool. So once we pick it from the drop down menu here, the next thing we need to do is check which logs we wish to receive. So in this case, we're looking at access controls issues. So we want all the access manager logs, the SMC logs, and the vertex or edge logs as well. Now this is important to note. We can also use this tool when we're collecting information for a video issue, but we would use different issues and traces on the side here. So we'd use stuff like media router, RTSP issues, or archiver synchronous playback issue as well. Now below here we can use the checkboxes to limit the type of messages that are shown in the trace. For most support issues, you would want to get all the information possible. Now our last section down here is to set up what prefix to use for the log file, how long to keep the logs for, and the maximum number of lines that a log should be allowed to hold. Once we have everything set up, we can hit the Start Tracing button on the bottom of the screen here, and it's going to give us this message that the config file has been updated, so the trace information is present and it will start running the requested traces. At this point, you should try to reproduce the problem, such as trying to add a unit again or running a manual synchronization. When you're finished, click on the Stop Tracing button. It's going to verify that you really do want to stop the trace, so once you hit yes, it's going to let you know that the config file holding the trace information was updated once again. We also have two convenience buttons on the bottom as well. One is to open the folder that is holding the logs we just generated, and another one is to upload the logs to an FTP site of your choosing. Once you click on that, it's going to pop up this window and ask you for the relevant FTP information. Now this is just a brief sample of what you can expect to see in the trace file. So we can see that some of this is relevant, such as seeing when an input has changed state, or if a controller received an access request as well. Now there's another way of setting up the traces, which is by manually modifying the log targets .gconfig file. This is the file that it's notifying you of in the trace application, the one that's saying it's been modified there. So this is really what the trace enabler is doing for you. It's modifying this file so you don't have to. If you take a look at the log file here, you can see the values that we set up in a few of the steps, such as the number of days to keep the logs, the maximum file size here, number of lines, and the trace information as well. So you can see by the example what we need to set up for the access manager trace here. We need to add this line under the traces. Now the main problem here is that there really is a risk of making a typo or a mistake in here, and in that case you're not going to get any kind of errors or warnings. It's just not going to activate the logging. So the trace enabler is much more straightforward, and you won't really be saving any time modifying the log file, and there is that risk of making a typo and having it not actually capture the information that you need. Okay, so our next set of logs to take a look at are for the units, so either HID unit logs or the Synergist Master Controller support logs. The HID unit logs are stored on the HID controllers and contain all the commands received by the unit and the actions that the unit took based on those commands. For an SMC unit, this same information is stored in the system logs. Using either one, we can basically tell if the problem is related to the unit. The problem with the HID unit logs is that they're deleted when the controller is restarted. So for that, we can use the var log fetcher utility to constantly bring the information over to the server so it won't be lost in the event of a unit restart. Now we're going to take a look at how to run this utility now, which will need to be run once per unit on the server that hosts the access manager role that the unit is connected to. Now the configuration is pretty simple. You'll need to put in the IP address of the HID unit, the password associated with the root account, and the path you would like to save the log files to. Below that, we'll choose the appropriate network adapter for the network that the unit is on, and we just need to hit the Start Capture button below it. Using the checkbox here, we can also choose to capture Wireshark data at the same time. Now if you have the auto scroll option enabled here, it's going to show the data on the right side and keep up with the incoming information. The status box below here can be used to see if the unit can be reached and basically information about the files that it's bringing over. Now if you want to stop bringing the logs over, you just need to click on the Stop Capture button right here. Going into the log files folder, you're going to see that the logs are created, both the text that we were seeing on the right side of the screen and the associated Wireshark trace as well. Now you're going to need a program such as WinPcap to view the trace file, which can be installed as part of the Security Center package. Now for the SMC, we can get to the system logs to see if there's any problems happening on the unit. Now, since the SMC is using flash memory, it's highly recommended to only turn on the system logs when recommended for troubleshooting an issue. If you leave that on constantly, it's going to cause excessive wear and tear on the memory with all the constantly writing to the flash memory of the log information. So to turn the logs on, go to the Portal tab of the SMC unit. And you can do that in the config tool, or you can connect to the unit's web page and click on the logging task from the configuration section here. So from the logging section here, make sure that the enabled is checked on the top, and check the activity events below it here. If you're troubleshooting an issue, it'd probably be best to have everything enabled. Now once the logs start getting information, you should see a Download Support Logs button from the Investigation section of the portal's homepage. When you have enough information or the particular problem has been reproduced, download the logs and give them to the member of the support team who's handling your case, and make sure you go in and uncheck that Enabled button in the logging section again. So let's take a quick look at the last section on Wireshark Traces. These are used to see if the problem is network related. So the execution of the network trace is the same as anything you'd use for something like a video issue, like waiting for signal. You basically just need to filter the Wireshark trace on the IP address of the unit, and you'll see all communication between the unit and the server hosting the access manager role. If you're using Evo units, make sure you don't only look for TCP traffic, as there are some other types of information that are passed between the unit and the server. As well, just like the SMC support logs, we need to make sure we turn off the Wireshark trace when we're finished with it. The logs can get rather large and will fill up a drive pretty quickly if you leave that unchecked. Alright, I'd just like to give you some final thoughts on the access control logs before we move on to the LPR section. Now we mentioned the Wireshark traces can get pretty large, but it's a good idea in general just to verify the disk space available before running any of the traces. If the traces fill up a drive, you could start seeing some pretty serious issues such as system crashes and other problems. Now just to give you an idea of how the logs are used, So if we found a problem in the console traces, we would likely get our development team involved to check the software. If we see something in the HID unit logs, we would work with HID to resolve the issue. And finally, if the problem is found in the Wireshark traces, we know that there's something going on with the network, and we would ask to have the IT department for the site to take a look. Now, on larger systems, we may have more than one access manager role. So if you're using multiple access managers, you'd need to enable the logging on each server that has an access manager role. Now, if you're looking for a particular problem with one unit, you can restrict the logging to the access manager server that unit is connected to. Okay, we're going to move on to the LPR component of Security Center and see what we can do when we're troubleshooting an AutoView issue. Now, most of the AutoView problems are related to the settings on the system, so most of what we're going to take a look at are the top places to look for configuration problems. Before we get there, let's see what tools we can use in some other cases. Starting with the event viewer, we can take a look at the event logs on the server. If you're taking a look at your reports and they have no results, you may have a problem with your SQL server. Take a look in the event viewer for any SQL errors, such as a message indicating that the database is full. This is a pretty common problem and something that is easy to check for. So using the SQL Server Express 2008 R2 that's installed with the Security Center, you do have a 10 GB database limit. You're going to need to make sure that the retention period that you have set up in the system are all adjusted so that it does not go over that limit. Just to give you an idea how to calculate that, an average read is 84 kilobytes. So you can estimate how much database space you're going to be using per day based on the number of reads that you're getting. This will give you the number of days you should use for your retention period. If you divide the, this is your 10 gigabyte limit, excuse me, right here. So you divide that and you're going to get the number of days that you can safely retain your data. Now, one important note is that the database does not actively clean up the space when it's needed. So when SQL hits that 10 gigabyte limit, it's going to stop registering reads until enough time has passed and your oldest database entries pass their retention period and are cleaned up. Now, for this reason, we need to make sure that even if you have a heavy day and get lots of hits, the retention periods are low enough that the database will not fill up completely. One last thing for the event viewer is that we can also use it to see if there are any problems connecting to the database or any problems with the services. So you can see the main logs we're using here. We use the Windows logs and the application and service logs, and the application one, the system, and the Genetec event viewer logs. Okay, now we're going to take a quick look at what we can use Wireshark for. Now, the default IP for a fixed sharp is 192.168.10.100, and for mobile sharps they start at 192.168.10.1 and increase for any additional units. So if somebody's gone in and actually changed the IP addresses for the sharp cameras, we can see the new IP addresses in Wireshark by looking for the DNS announcement. So just judging by the packet information, it should be pretty obvious that it's coming from the sharp, and we can identify the new IP address from it. Okay, so there's one thing we can do from the console that I'd like to cover, which is simulating a read. Now, this is a good way of testing hotlists if you have a fixed sharp camera set up on your system. For a mobile system, you can just manually enter a read right from the controller to test it. Now, in order for the console commands to be present, you're going to have the LPR manager set up on your system, otherwise you won't see the commands in the list at all. So from the commands section of the console, we need to go to the license plate management commands, and then we need to run the simulate read command, which is a little farther down the list here. It's going to come up with this pop-up window, and it's going to be asking you for a few pieces of information about the read, but the only thing you really need to enter to test is the plate number right here. So if you wish to test to see if a hotlist hit comes up, make sure that the plate you're using in this test here is within the hotlist that you want to verify. Alright, let's get into where we may encounter most of the problems, which is in the configuration. So first of all, if your Sharp unit is not being recognized or cannot be added to the system, open a remote desktop session into the Sharp, either fixed or mobile, and check if all the services are running. The services are the logger, the plate reader, the portal, and the updater service, and we also have the HAL service right here as well. So you can restart some of these if you want, but just make sure that the HAL service is never restarted. Now if the data does not seem to be getting to or from the Sharp, make sure all the required network ports are open on all firewalls, and all exceptions have been made for the Security Center folders as well. Now a lot of the problems can be resolved by opening the firewall ports. We need to make sure all of them are open as well, because even if you have one closed port, that might cause problems. So for example, here we have the LPR manager. These are the ports we need for just for the LPR manager. But we do have about 13 ports that we do need to be open, and you just need to take a look in the AutoView handbook to see the full list and to make sure that all those ports are open. Now in case the support team needs to do more investigation, we can export the settings from the Sharp portal. This will make a file with all the settings files and event logs, and it's saved on the local machine we use to connect to the portal. Now when you're talking to the support team, please also provide the date and time the error occurred, basically to save on time looking through all those logs to find the relevant information. Now when we're looking at the services, it would be preferable to use an administrator account, or at least just make sure that the account in use has full control and there's no restrictions on the network for the service account that you're using. Now when we don't see the context or LPR images in reports, such as the reads report, there might be a Windows update that's causing it to not be able to display the images correctly. So take a look for KB2670838 in the Programs and Features section of Windows, and remove it if it's present. It's not needed by anything else in the Security Center AutoView system, so you're not going to see any adverse effects on your server or anything else running there. So just go through, select it, and hit the uninstall, and that should bring everything back up and running properly. If you're getting bad reads, you might want to take a look at the Sharp configuration. The first thing to look at is the context and the read strategy. So normally the read strategy here is set to slow moving, where it tries to capture plates less often but gets more accurate reads, while fast moving takes more frames but has to approximate the read. The fast moving option is usually used in highway setups. The next thing to check is actually the extension down here. So we want to make sure that's set correctly to a Security Center for a fixed Sharp, or a mobile for a vehicle mounted unit. Okay, so if you're not seeing the unit in Security Center, or you're not getting any information from it, you're going to want to make sure the listening port set on the camera here is set the same as the port set in the live section of the LPR Manager properties. So these two need to be the same value, they need to be synced up here. From the portal of a Sharp camera, we also have a diagnostics tab here. If you're seeing any problems, there might be something that's really obvious that's coming up in the errors here. So it would be recommended to take a look there first and see what you can pull out of the messages that are coming up here. If the Sharp does not seem to be connecting to Security Center, you can click on the Show Extension Details down here, and that's in the Status tab of the Sharp portal. Now it's going to show you the Security Center's server it's trying to connect to, and the port that's in use as well. If it's not connecting and not sending the reads over, you're going to see something like this. So you're not going to see the Security Center system in there. And it's also going to show how many reads have been stored temporarily in the Sharp that are waiting to be sent over to Security Center. If you see a clock sync error in the status, make sure you've got port 4546 open. Now, one thing to note is that the time on the camera is in UTC. That's intentional, and that shouldn't be modified. So it's that's the time zone it should be using, and we don't need to make any changes there. Now, from the status, we can also check the diagnostics, and we can create a diagnostics file as well if that's needed for our support team. We can also view a log file in the messages section, and we can see what's happening in the download section as well if we need to. Now, a few last points on the LPR section. Just remember to turn off the plate filtering log when it's not needed. Basically, there's no size limit on that log, and that log could fill up a drive if you leave it on constantly. And make sure if you've opened a remote desktop session to go into your Sharps, just make sure you don't log off or disconnect when you get out of it. Just close the remote desktop session and you'll be fine from there. Okay, so that's the end of the information we wanted to cover in the webinar today. I hope that was useful for all of you. We're going to have a link to the PDF version of the slides in the GTAP forums when we post the questions and answers. So feel free to download that and keep it on hand if you ever have an issue in the future. We're going to leave the session active for about another 10 minutes or so in case you have any additional questions for Martina, Wasim, Patrick, Scott, or myself. And in case you need to review the webinar or know somebody who would like to watch it, we're going to have the video posted in the video section of the GTAP within the next couple of days. If you have any comments or feedback on the webinar, we'd love to hear them. When you close the webinar session, you're going to be presented with a few short survey questions just to see how we did today. So we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a minute just to give us a little feedback on the webinar. If you think of anything you'd like to ask or you have any other comments, you can also leave those in the GTAC Tech Talk section of the GTAP forum. We're also going to have the general questions and answers from today's webinar, as well as links to the videos, posted in the forum really soon, so that should be up either today or tomorrow. On behalf of myself and everyone at the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the webinar today, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.